took him into a small room, and Harry told him the story of the old woman with the hair on her hands. The policeman took the bag, opened it carefully, and looked inside. "I think you were very lucky, sir," he said. "Look at this." And he showed Harry a long, heavy knife. Hats on. When all the good people are in bed at night, the police go round the streets and watch the banks and shops and other buildings. One night, after midnight, Trevor Taylor, a young policeman, was in the street in the centre of town when he saw that one small shop had its door open. He looked through the door and he could see a lot of books, newspapers and cigarettes. Perhaps somebody's inside the shop, he thought. So he slowly pushed the door and walked in. He looked round but found nobody in the shop, so he called the police station on his radio. Trevor was a heavy smoker, and there were a lot of cigarettes in the shop. He quickly took a box of cigarettes and put them under his big policeman's hat. Then he went through to the back of the shop, but he didn't find anybody there. About 5 minutes later, a man came running along the street and arrived at the door. "This is my shop," he said, "and I want to thank you for seeing the open door." He looked at Trevor and asked, "Do you smoke?" Yes, I do," the young policeman answered. "Good. Here, take 3 of these boxes of cigarettes, a small thank you," he said. No, I can't. I'm very happy to help you. It's my job," said Trevor, "and I haven't a place to put them." "That's no problem," said the man from the shop. "Put them under your hat." The bank robber's mistake. The head of the big bank in the centre of town telephoned the police at about 3 o'clock one afternoon. "Come quickly! We had a robber in here. He left only 2 minutes ago." It was very easy to catch this bank robber. When the police arrived at the bank, the cashier told them about the robbery. "It was all very sudden. This man came into the bank and walked over to my window. He pushed an envelope across the desk to me with some words on it. 'Give me all the money, I've got a gun.'" "What did you do?" asked the policeman. "I looked at the envelope for a moment. I was quite nervous. Then I gave the robber all the money in my desk. It happened very fast. He ran out with the money in a green bag," she answered. "Oh, here's his envelope." And she gave the policeman the robber's envelope. When the robber left the bank, he went home. It was 3:30. He turned on the radio and listened to the news, but there was nothing about the robbery. But half an hour later, when a police car arrived at his house, he knew something was wrong. "How did you find me?" he asked. "It was easy," answered one of the policemen. "The cashier gave us your envelope with your name and address on it. So, here we are." Chapter 4. Living and Dying. Dead cold. In the old Soviet Union, Russia, it was often hard to buy food. Meat was the most difficult thing to find. When people wanted to buy something, they usually had to wait in a long line before they could get it and pay for it. One day in Moscow, some years ago, there was the usual long line of people at the cashier's desk in a shop. It was winter, and the weather was quite cold. In the line, there was an old woman with a very big hat on her head. She waited quietly with the other people, but then suddenly she fell to the floor. "What's wrong with her?" somebody asked. "Get a doctor," another person said. One man in the line was a doctor, so he quickly went over to the woman on the floor. He looked at her carefully and took her hand. Then he took off her hat. Under it was a frozen chicken. "Oh, that's very sad," the doctor said. "I think she took the chicken and put it under her hat because she didn't have any money to pay for it." But the chicken was too cold. She had a frozen head. The chicken killed her. Coat from the Dead. One evening, a man called James was on the road from Oxford to London. There weren't many cars on the road because it was late. Suddenly, in the lights of his car, he saw a woman by the road. She was quite young and very pretty. "It's dangerous to walk along the road when it's dark and late," he thought. He stopped, opened the window, and asked the young woman, "Where are you going? It's dangerous to stand here at night. Perhaps I can take you to London with me." The young woman didn't answer, but she opened the door of the car and got in. James asked her a lot of questions. "What's your name? Where do you live? Why are you on the road at night? Is your family in London? Where are your friends? Have you got any money? Are you hungry?" The young woman sat next to James, but she said nothing. Not one word. She only looked at the road. Soon, James stopped asking questions, and they drove along without talking. Coming into London, there were more cars, and James had to drive more slowly. Suddenly, the young woman started to open the door, so James stopped the car quickly. They were in front of a house on a long street. The woman opened the door and got out of the car. Then she slowly walked up to the front door of the house. James watched her and thought angrily, "She didn't say thank you." 3 days later, he opened the back door of his car and found a coat. "This isn't my coat," he thought. Then he remembered the young woman. Perhaps it was her coat. He had to drive to London again that evening, so he thought, "I'll take her coat back. I remember the street and the house." He drove there, parked in front of the house, and walked up to the door. An older woman answered. "Does a young woman live here?" he asked. "I think this is her coat. She left it in my car 3 days ago." The woman looked at the coat and began to cry. "That was my daughter's coat." "Here, please give it back to her then," James said. "I can't," the woman said. "She's dead." "Dead?" said James. "Yes, she died 5 years ago." "5 years ago?" James asked quietly. Yes, on the road between Oxford and London, in an accident," the woman said. Beer today, gone tomorrow. John Buss lived in Manchester with his grandfather, Frank, an old man of 92. But Frank wasn't happy. He was in hospital. He didn't like the noise in the hospital very much, and it was too hot, he told John when he visited his grandfather one afternoon. "Can I bring you something when I come next time?" John asked. "I can visit you again tomorrow." His grandfather answered quickly, "Oh, yes, please. Bring me some beer," he said very quietly and looked round carefully. Nobody heard him, only John. "I usually drink 2 or 3 beers every day, but they don't give me any in this place." "But, Grandad, you can't drink beer in here. You know that. The doctor told you." I know. Be careful. Put the beer in a bag, then nobody will see it." So the next day, John went back to the hospital with some bottles of beer in a bag and gave it to his grandfather. The old man looked in the bag, smiled and said, "Oh, thank you, John. Thank you. Now I'm happy." Frank opened a bottle and drank it. He opened a second bottle and drank it. After that, he opened a third bottle. 2 days later, the doctor telephoned John. "I'm sorry, Mr. Buss, but I have some sad news for you. Your granddad died last night. But he was happy. He had a smile on his face." John laughed because he remembered the bottles of beer. His grandfather liked beer, and he was always happy with a bottle in his hand. "Did you bring him some beer?" the doctor asked. Yes, I did," John answered. "He had 2 or 3 bottles 2 days ago." "Oh, I see," the doctor answered. "He was happy because he had some beer." "But I don't understand," John thought. "I took him long life beer."
Tony turned round. His face was white. "Don't tell the police," he said. "Please, I haven't stolen anything. I haven't done anything wrong." No, of course not," said the teacher. "But who are you? What are you doing in my classroom? And how did this piano get here?" Mr. Gordon visited the farm and talked to Mr. and Mrs. Wood. "Tony is very special," said Mr. Gordon. "I have been a teacher for 40 years, but I have never met a boy like Tony. He must have music lessons at once. Then he must go to the College of Music in London. He needs to work with other musical boys and girls." "But his mother and father are poor," said Mrs. Wood. "They can't pay for music lessons. They can't send him to college. They have 5 small children at home. Tony sends them money every month." "I can give Tony his first lessons," said Mr. Gordon. "I don't want any money. I'll be very happy to teach this wonderful boy. I feel— oh, how can I explain it to you? This is a very exciting time for me. Last night I came to school to look for a book, and I found a musician. But Tony learns very quickly. Soon he will need a really good teacher. Then we'll have to think about money. Perhaps Tony can go to the College of Music in the daytime and work in a restaurant in the evenings. No, he can't, said Mr. Wood. Suddenly his face was red and angry. Tony is a good boy. He's like a son to us. His father is poor, but we are not. That's right, said his wife. She was usually a quiet woman, but her eyes were bright and excited. We will send Tony to the College of Music, she said. Tony knew nothing about their conversation. He was cleaning Mr. Wood's new car when Mr. Gordon visited the farm. But that visit changed his life. Mr. Wood had a quiet talk with him later. Mr. Gordon wants to give you piano lessons, he told Tony. Tony's eyes shone like stars. Then he shook his head. I haven't any money, sir, he said. Mr. Gordon doesn't want any money. I've had a talk with him. You are going to go to the school at 4 o'clock every afternoon. You will have your lesson, and you will practice on the piano for 2 hours. Then you'll come back to the farm and have your supper. But my work, began Tony. I can find another farm boy, said Mr. Wood. But good musicians are special people. Give me 3 tickets for your first concert, and I'll be happy. Chapter 7. The Music Competition. Tony worked and worked. He got up at 6 every morning. He worked on the farm until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But every minute of the day, music filled his mind. At 4 o'clock, he cycled to his piano lesson with Mr. Gordon. He practiced until 7 o'clock. Then he cycled back to the farm for supper. After supper, he read Mr. Gordon's music books. Often he fell asleep at the kitchen table. At night, while he slept, his mind was still full of music. Small black notes danced in front of his eyes. When he woke up, the music was still there. Tony lived in a world of music. The leaves fell from the trees. Winter came. It was dark when Tony got up in the mornings. It was dark when he cycled to his piano lesson. And it was dark when he cycled back to the farm again. Sometimes it snowed. Then he had to walk to and from the school, but he never missed a lesson. "How's the boy getting on?" the farmer asked Mr. Gordon one day. "Very well," said the teacher. "But he's too quick for me. Soon he'll need a real teacher." Spring came, and the trees were green again. "There's a music competition in the town on June the 12th, said Mr. Gordon one evening. "Can I go and listen?" asked Tony. "No," said his teacher. "I will go and listen. You are going to play in the competition." "But I can't do that. I need to practice more. I'm not ready," said Tony. "You will be ready," said his teacher quietly. Mr. Gordon was a kind old man, but he made Tony practice for 4 hours every day. Another boy helped Mr. Wood on the farm while Tony practised for the competition. 2 weeks to go before the competition, said Mr. Gordon one evening. Look, this is the programme. The programme was big and beautiful and expensive. Tony looked for his name. He found it. Anthony Evans, aged 15, piano. Nobody calls me Anthony, he said. Why can't they call me Tony? Tony is a boy's name, said Mr. Gordon. Anthony is a man's name. Tony Evans was a farm boy. Anthony Evans is a musician. One day, Anthony Evans will be famous all over the world. And from today, I'm going to call you Anthony. On the morning of the competition, Mr. and Mrs. Wood and Anthony went into town in the car. While Mr. Wood had a drink with some friends, Mrs. Wood took Anthony shopping. She bought him a new brown suit and a new white shirt. Then she took him into a shoe shop. And Pip's father sold her some new shoes for Anthony. They were beautiful shoes. They shone like glass, and Mrs. Wood liked them very much. The shoes were too small, and they hurt Anthony's feet. But he did not say anything. What could he say? Mrs. Wood paid for the shoes, and Pip's father put them in a box. I hear you're playing in the music competition tonight, he said to Anthony. I saw your name in the programme. Anthony Evans. It sounds wonderful. Good luck. In the evening, the Wood family and Anthony drove to Mr. Gordon's house. Mr. Gordon came out. He was wearing his best suit. You look wonderful, Mr. Gordon, laughed Mrs. Wood. Are you getting married? The old man got into the car, and they all drove to the competition. The Woods went to their seats, but Mr. Gordon took Anthony through the stage door. He took him to a room behind the stage. A lot of musicians were waiting there. The women were wearing long dresses. The men were wearing evening suits. Nobody spoke to Anthony. Goodbye, my boy, said Mr. Gordon, and good luck. Anthony sat in the waiting room for a long time. His feet hurt. They burned like fire. His hands felt cold. They were shaking. From a long way away, he heard the sound of a piano. Every few minutes, a man came in and called someone's name. After a long time, the man came in and said, Mr. Evans, please. Anthony did not move. Nobody usually called him Mr. Evans. Mr. Anthony Evans, please, said the man again. Come along. We haven't got all night. Anthony got up. Oh, my feet hurt, he thought. He followed the man up some stairs. I'm walking like Charlie Chaplin, he thought. Everybody will laugh at me. He walked onto the stage and sat down at the big piano. The dark wood shone like glass. He could see his face in it. He turned round and looked at the sea of faces. He could not see the Wood family. He could not see Mr. Gordon But suddenly, Anthony felt their love and their kindness. His feet stopped hurting. His hands stopped shaking. He touched the piano. It was much bigger than the old piano in the classroom. The keys looked very clean and new. He wanted to touch them. "Well," he said to himself, "of course I want to touch them. That's why I'm here." And he began to play. He forgot about himself. He forgot about all the strange people in the theatre. And he just played for his friends. He played for Mr. and Mrs. Wood. He played for Linda. He played for Mr. Gordon. And he played for old Mrs. Lark. "Where are you now, Mrs. Lark?" he thought. "Do you remember Tony Evans? You gave us a lot of happiness, Mrs. Lark. Thank you. Thank you." His hands flew over the piano keys. Beautiful sounds filled the theatre. "He's going to win the competition," Mr. Gordon said to himself. "And this is the happiest day of my life." And Anthony won the competition. He knew that he was the winner because he saw his photograph in the newspaper the next day. But he could not remember anything about it. All he remembered was his feet. When he got out of the car, he could not walk. His new shoes hurt him too much. Mr. Wood helped him into the kitchen, while Mrs. Wood filled an old tin bath with warm water. Linda took Anthony's shoes off. His feet were very hot and red. He put them in the warm water. "This is wonderful," he said. "You've won!" shouted Mrs. Wood. "Forget about your feet, boy. You've won the competition. This is the most important night in your life." But Anthony was too tired to answer. They helped him up to bed, and he slept until 9 o'clock the next morning. Linda brought him breakfast in bed. He felt very strange and uncomfortable. "I've never had breakfast in bed before," he told her. Chapter 8. The end of the story. Sir Anthony Evans turned to me. "That competition was the start of wonderful things for me," he said. "I went to the College of Music for 3 years. Of course, I worked hard, but I enjoyed every minute. I always went back to the farm for my holidays. And one summer, when I was 20, I asked Miss Linda Wood a very important question. 'I can't give you much, Linda,' I told her, 'but one day I shall be rich and famous. Then I'll come back again, and I'll ask you to marry me.' She gave me a long, loving look. Then she laughed. 'Oh, Anthony,' she said, 'don't wait until you're rich and famous. Ask me now.' So I did, and here we are. We've been married for 60 years. 5 years ago, the Queen invited us to Buckingham Palace. I was Mr. Anthony Evans when I went into the palace. I was Sir Anthony Evans when I came out. And—" he took his wife's hand. "My dear Linda was Lady Evans." There was a knock at the door of the dressing-room. 2 minutes, Sir Anthony, said a voice. The famous musician stood up. I'm ready, he said. He turned to me. How many concerts have I given? 2,000? 3,000? For me, every concert is new and exciting. Now, go, my dear, and write your story. Tell the readers of your newspaper that I am a very lucky man.
Chapter 1. My First Sea Journey. Before I begin my story, I would like to tell you a little about myself. I was born in the year 1632, in the city of York in the north of England. My father was German, but he came to live and work in England. Soon after that, he married my mother, who was English. Her family name was Robinson. So when I was born, they called me Robinson after her. My father did well in his business, and I went to a good school. He wanted me to get a good job and live a quiet, comfortable life. But I didn't want that. I wanted adventure and an exciting life. I want to be a sailor and go to sea, I told my mother and father. They were very unhappy about this. Please don't go, my father said. You won't be happy, you know. Sailors have a difficult and dangerous life. And because I loved him, and he was unhappy, I tried to forget about the sea. But I couldn't forget. And about a year later, I saw a friend in town. His father had a ship, and my friend said to me, "We're sailing to London tomorrow. Why don't you come with us?" And so, on September the 1st, 1651, I went to Hull, and the next day we sailed for London. But a few days later, there was a strong wind. The sea was rough and dangerous, and the ship went up and down, up and down. I was very ill and very afraid. "Oh, I don't want to die," I cried. "I want to live. If I live, I'll go home and never go to sea again." The next day, the wind dropped, and the sea was quiet and beautiful again. "Well, Bob," my friend laughed, "how do you feel now? The wind wasn't too bad." "What?" I cried. "It was a terrible storm." "Oh, that wasn't a storm," my friend answered. "Just a little wind. Forget it. Come and have a drink." After a few drinks with my friend, I felt better. I forgot about the danger and decided not to go home. I didn't want my friends and family to laugh at me. I stayed in London for some time, but I still wanted to go to sea. So, when the captain of a ship asked me to go with him to Guinea in Africa, I agreed. And so I went to sea for the second time. It was a good ship, and everything went well at first, but I was very ill again, Then, when we were near the Canary Islands, a Turkish pirate ship came after us. They were famous thieves of the sea at that time. There was a long, hard fight, but when it finished, we and the ship were prisoners. The Turkish captain and his men took us to Salih in Morocco. They wanted to sell us as slaves in the markets there. But in the end, the Turkish captain decided to keep me for himself and took me home with him. This was a sudden and terrible change in my life. I was now a slave, and this Turkish captain was my master. Chapter 2. Down the Coast of Africa. For 2 long years, I lived the life of a slave. I worked in the house and the garden, and every day I planned to escape, but it was never possible. I thought about it day and night. My master liked to go fishing in a little boat, and he always took me with him. A man called Merle and a young boy also went with us. One day my master said to us, "Some of my friends want to go fishing tomorrow. Get the boat ready." So we put a lot of food and drink on the boat, and the next morning we waited for my master and his friends. But when my master arrived, he was alone. "My friends don't want to go fishing today," he said to me. "But you go with Merle and the boy, and catch some fish for our supper tonight." "Yes, master," I answered quietly. But inside I was excited. "Perhaps now I can escape," I said to myself. My master went back to his friends, and we took the boat out to sea. For a time we fished quietly, and then I moved carefully behind Merle and knocked him into the water. "Swim!" I cried. "Swim to the shore!" My master liked to shoot seabirds, and so there were guns on the boat. Quickly, I took one of these guns. Merle was swimming after the boat, and I shouted to him, "Go back to the shore! You can swim there. It's not too far. I won't hurt you, but if you come near the boat, I'll shoot you through the head." So Merle turned and swam back to the shore as quickly as he could. Then I said to the boy, "Zuri, if you help me, I'll be a good friend to you. If you don't help me, I'll push you into the sea too." But Zuri was happy to help me. "I'll go all over the world with you," he cried. I wanted to sail to the Canary Islands, but I was afraid to go too far from the shore. It was only a small boat, and so we sailed on south for some days. We had very little water, and it was dangerous country here, with many wild animals. We were afraid, but we often had to go on shore to get more water. Once I used a gun to shoot a wild animal, I don't know what animal it was, but it made a good meal. For about 10 or 12 days, we sailed on south, down the coast of Africa. Then, one day, we saw some people on the shore. Strange, wild people, who did not look friendly. By now, we had very little food, and we really needed help. We were afraid, but we had to go on shore. At first, they were afraid of us too. Perhaps white people never visited this coast. We did not speak their language, of course, so we used our hands and faces to show that we were hungry. They came with food for us, but then they moved away quickly. We carried the food to our boat, and they watched us. I tried to thank them, but I had nothing to give them. Just then, 2 big wild cats came down to the shore from the mountains. I think they were leopards. The people were afraid of these wild cats, and the women cried out. Quickly, I took a gun and shot one of the animals. The second wild cat ran back up into the mountains. Guns were new to these African people, and they were afraid of the loud noise and the smoke. But they were happy about the dead wild cat. I gave them the meat of the dead animal, and they gave us more food and water. We now had a lot of food and water, and we sailed on. 11 days later, we came near the Cape Verde Islands. We could see them, but we couldn't get near because there was no wind. We waited. Suddenly, Zuri called to me, "Look, a ship!" He was right. We called and shouted and sailed our little boat as fast as we could. But the ship did not see us. Then I remembered the guns, which made a lot of smoke. A few minutes later, the ship saw us and turned. When we were on the ship, the Portuguese captain listened to my story. He was going to Brazil and agreed to help me, but he wanted nothing for his help. "No," he said, when I tried to pay him. "Perhaps one day someone will help me when I need it." But he gave me money for my boat, and for Zuri too. At first, I did not want to sell Zuri as a slave, after all our dangerous adventures together. But Zuri was happy to go to the captain. And the captain was a good man. "In 10 years' time," he said, "Zuri can go free." When we arrived in Brazil 3 weeks later, I said goodbye to the captain and Zuri, left the ship, and went to begin a new life. Chapter 3. The Storm and the Shipwreck. I stayed in Brazil and worked hard for some years. By then I was rich, but also bored. One day, some friends came to me and said, "We're going to Africa to do business. Why don't you come with us? We'll all be rich after this journey." How stupid I was. I had an easy, comfortable life in Brazil, but of course I agreed. And so, in 1659, I went to sea again. At first, all went well. But then there was a terrible storm. For 12 days the wind and the rain didn't stop. We lost 3 men in the sea, and soon the ship had holes in its sides. "We're all going to die this time," I said to myself. Then one morning, one of the sailors saw land. But the next minute, our ship hit some sand just under the sea. The ship could not move, and we were really in danger now. The sea was trying to break the ship into pieces, and we had very little time. Quickly, we put a boat into the sea and got off the ship. But the sea was very rough, and our little boat could not live for long in that wild water. Half an hour later, the angry sea turned our boat over, and we were all in the water. I looked round for my friends, but I could see nobody. I was alone. That day I was lucky, and the sea carried me to the shore. I could not see the land, only mountains of water all around me. Then, suddenly, I felt the ground under my feet. Another mountain of water came, pushed me up the beach, and I fell on the wet sand. At first, I was very thankful to be alive. Slowly, I got to my feet and went higher up the shore. From there, I looked out to sea. I could see our ship, but it was wrecked, and there was nobody near it. There was nobody in the water. All my friends were dead. I was alive, but in a strange, wild country, with no food, no water, and no gun. It was dark now, and I was tired. I was afraid to sleep on the shore. Perhaps there were wild animals there. So I went up into a tree, and I stayed there all night. Chapter 4. A New Life on an Island. When day came, the sea was quiet again. I looked for our ship, and to my surprise, it was still there, and still in one piece. "I think I can swim to it," I said to myself. So I walked down to the sea, and before long I was at the ship and was swimming round it. But how could I get onto it? In the end, I got in through a hole in the side, but it wasn't easy. There was a lot of water in the ship, but the sand under the sea was still holding the ship in one place. The back of the ship was high out of the water, and I was very thankful for this, because all the ship's food was there. I was very hungry, so I began to eat something at once. Then I decided to take some of it back to the shore with me. But how could I get it there? I looked around the ship, and after a few minutes, I found some long pieces of wood. I tied them together with rope. Then I got the things that I wanted from the ship. There was a big box of food, rice and salted meat and hard ship's bread. I also took many strong knives and other tools, the ship's sails and ropes, paper, pens, books, and 7 guns. Now I needed a little sail from the ship, and then I was ready. Slowly and carefully, I went back to the shore. It was difficult to stop my things from falling into the sea, but in the end, I got everything onto the shore. Now I needed somewhere to keep my things. There were some hills around me, so I decided to build myself a little house on one of them. I walked to the top of the highest hill and looked down. I was very unhappy, because I saw then that I was on an island. There were 2 smaller islands a few miles away, and after that, only the sea. Just the sea, for mile after mile after mile. After a time, I found a little cave in the side of a hill. In front of it, there was a good place to make a home. So I used the ship's sails, rope, and pieces of wood. And after a lot of hard work, I had a very fine tent. The cave, at the back of my tent, was a good place to keep my food, and so I called it my kitchen. That night, I went to sleep in my new home. The next day, I thought about the possible dangers on the island. Were there wild animals? And perhaps wild people, too, on my island? I didn't know, but I was very afraid. So I decided to build a very strong fence. I cut down young trees and put them in the ground, in a half circle around the front of my tent. I used many of the ship's ropes too, and in the end my fence was as strong as a stone wall. Nobody could get over it, through it, or round it. Making tents and building fences is hard work. I needed many tools to help me. So I decided to go back to the ship again and get some more things. I went back 12 times, but soon after my 12th visit, there was another terrible storm. The next morning, when I looked out to sea, there was no ship. When I saw that, I was very unhappy. Why am I alive? And why are all my friends dead? I asked myself. What will happen to me now, alone on this island without friends? How can I ever escape from it? Then I told myself that I was lucky. Lucky to be alive. Lucky to have food and tools. Lucky to be young and strong. But I knew that my island was somewhere off the coast of South America. Ships did not often come down this coast, and I said to myself, I'm going to be on this island for a long time. So, on a long piece of wood, I cut these words. I came here on the 30th of September, 1659. After that, I decided to make a cut for each day. Chapter 5. Learning to live alone. I still needed a lot of things. Well, I said, I'm going to have to make them. So every day I worked. First of all, I wanted to make my cave bigger. I carried out stone from the cave, and after many days' hard work, I had a large cave in the side of the hill. Then I needed a table and a chair, and that was my next job. I had to work on them for a long time. I also wanted to make places to put all my food and all my tools and guns. But every time I wanted a piece of wood, I had to cut down a tree. It was long, slow, difficult work. And during the next months, I learnt to be very clever with my tools. There was no hurry. I had all the time in the world. I also went out every day, and I always had my gun with me. Sometimes I killed a wild animal, and then I had meat to eat. But when it got dark, I had to go to bed because I had no light. I couldn't read or write because I couldn't see. For a long time, I didn't know what to do. But in the end, I learnt how to use the fat of dead animals to make a light. The weather on my island was usually very hot, and there were often storms and heavy rain. The next June, it rained all the time, and I couldn't go out very often. I was also ill for some weeks, but slowly I got better. When I was stronger, I began to go out again. The first time, I killed a wild animal, and the second time, I caught a big turtle. I was on the island for 10 months before I visited other parts of it. During those months, I worked hard on my cave and my house and my fence. Now I was ready to find out more about the rest of the island. First, I walked along the side of a little river. There I found open ground without trees. Later, I came to more trees with many different fruits. I decided to take a lot of the fruit and to put it to dry in the sun for